This is one of the most disturbing Old Testament stories in the Bible. But before we get into that, my name is Elijah and I make videos about faith that engages the culture for Jesus, so make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and make sure to watch till the end to learn this very important lesson.
There is a story in the Old Testament that, if I'm honest with you, I consider the most disturbing in the entire Bible. It could well be considered inappropriate for minors. So before you watch this video, I want to make sure you know that this video is not suitable for all ages and could trigger some kind of trauma from your past. The story I am referring to is found in chapters 19 to 21 of the book of Judges. Many people are familiar with chapter 19, but do not read the rest of the story. I believe there are several important lessons that you and I need to learn from such a disturbing story. First, I will tell you the story as dramatically as possible, and then we will explore the lessons I believe we can learn. Join me in Judges chapter 19. In chapter 19, verse 1, in the days when there was no king in Israel, a Levite who lived in a remote part of the hill country of Ephraim acquired a woman from Bethlehem of Judah as his concubine. I want you to understand that here is a Levite man living in the northern part of Israel, and he acquires this woman to be his concubine, or wife, however you want to call it, and she is living in the south in Bethlehem. Let's continue the story. She was unfaithful to him and left him for her father's house in Bethlehem of Judah, where she stayed for 4 months. She betrayed him and returned to her father's house in Bethlehem. So the story continues. Essentially, this Levite man wants to get his wife back. So he travels from the north of the hill country of Ephraim to the south in Bethlehem to seek this woman and be with her again. He gets there, and her father is very hospitable. Several times the man says, "I have to go. Give me my wife." So
Keep in mind, this is a story of more of a historical fact, and not off of like, this is exactly what you should do. Obviously, you shouldn't have concubines or in more than one wife. But what they're getting at is the reasons and the problems that come when there is no king in the land, when there's no authority, and when they don't follow God's law. And this is exactly what happens, which is super sad and crazy, and we all can learn from this today.
I can return home. And the father says, no, stay another night. He says, "Okay, I'll stay another night." And this repeats for several days until finally the man says, "With all due respect, I appreciate your hospitality, but I need to leave. I need to go home." So finally, he leaves to go home. And that is where all the tragedy occurs. While the man is with his concubine, traveling in southern Israel from Bethlehem toward the north to Ephraim, they were near Jebus, and the day was almost over. The servant said to his master, "Please, why don't we stop in this city of Jebus and spend the night here?" But his master replied, "We will not stop in a foreign city where there are no Israelites. Let's continue to Gibeah." Then the servant suggested, "Let's try to reach one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah." So they continued their journey, and the sun set as they approached Gibeah in Benjamin. They went there, and to their surprise, no one was willing to take them into their homes. Hospitality was a significant aspect of Israelite culture. At the end of the night, an old man appeared in the square and asked, "Why are you still here? Hasn't someone already welcomed you into their house?" They responded, no one has taken us in." The old man said, "You know what? You can stay with me tonight." The Levite responded, "Great, just to let you know, we don't need anything from you. We have enough food for our donkeys, for me, and for my concubine. We just need a place to rest our heads. If you give me a pillow, that's all I need." The old man said, "No problem, you can stay with me." So, the Levite, his servant, and his concubine spent the night at this man's house in Gibeah. Then this happened. While they were enjoying themselves, suddenly wicked men of the city surrounded the house and banged on the door. They said to the homeowner, the old man, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." Wow.
Doesn't this kind of remind you of Sodom and Gomorrah a little bit? How evil and wicked they would get, and they saw the angels that were visiting Lot at that time, and all the people saw him and they wanted to come out and have sex with him, which is super crazy, super wild, and just shows you how evil the land has become when they do not follow God and serve God.
This is where the story takes a turn. There are perverted men living in Gibeah, Benjamites, who go to this old man's house and say, "We know you have a guest in your house, bring him out so all of us can have sex with him." Now see what happens next. The homeowner came out and said, "Please do not commit this evil act, my brothers. After all, this man has come under my roof. Do not commit this vile atrocity. Here, let me bring out my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Abuse them and do whatever you want with them, but do..."
That's the thing that's so sad during that time is like, yeah, you can't have sex with the man, but you can go abuse the women whatever you want, which is super, super sad, and which is just crazy because they weren't thinking about how every person is a child of God. man and woman, male and female, all are a child of God, made in the image of God. And you can't just protect men, you also have to protect women. Even you want to protect women even more.
Do not commit this outrageous thing against this man. We will deal with this a bit later in this video, but what happens next is unthinkable. The verse 25 says, "But the man would not listen. Then he took his concubine and brought her out to them. They raped and abused her all night until morning. At dawn, they let her go." Now, my friend, that's why I said this video might be considered inappropriate for minors and could trigger some things from your past. Because imagine here, there's a group of perverted men and they're taking turns having sex with this woman. They are raping her throughout the night until in the morning they finally let her go. And this is what happens to this young woman, a tragic start. In the morning, the woman returned, and as dawn broke, she collapsed at the door of the house where her Lord was. You can imagine how worn out, beaten, and abused she was from the entire night by these men, that she barely had the strength to crawl back to the man's house and just collapsed on the porch and lay there. Now, observe what happens next. It says here that when her Lord got up in the morning, he opened the doors of the house and went out to continue his journey. There was the woman, his concubine, collapsed near the door of the house with her hands on the...
So the master didn't even care. He just like, oh, let's go, which is super sad. I don't know, it's so confusing why this is so messed up. There's so many books in the Bible that are just so sad, and like you can see, like this is what happens to society when you don't follow God. This is what happens when you turn your back on him and you're not following his will and you want to do what you want. And places and people get perverted when they don't follow God's laws, and it gets worse and worse.
Threshold. "Get up," he said to her. "Let's go." But there was no response. The woman had been so abused that she had died. Note that it says here that the man put her on his donkey and went to his home. What happens next is very sad and horrific, but it says as follows. When he entered his house, he took a knife, held his concubine, cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and then sent her throughout the territory.
What is this? Some crazy horror story? Oh my goodness. This is super, super dark. Oh my, wow.
Everyone who saw this said, "Nothing like this has happened or been seen since the day the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt until now." Think about it, discuss, and speak up. This man took his concubine to his house, cut her into 12 pieces, and undoubtedly attached a letter to each piece of his deceased concubine, and sent a different piece of her body to the 12 tribes of Israel, with a letter detailing exactly what had been done by his own brothers, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin. And when these other tribes saw and read what had happened with this woman, they said, "Nothing like this has happened throughout our history." Now, there is much more to the story in chapters 20 and 21. So I want you to wait, but here's where I want to start looking at some lessons we can learn from this.
Now pay attention real close, because this is actually really important. These lessons that you can learn from this story actually can apply to you today. It might not be that extreme like this story, but they truly could apply to you, so make sure to watch here.
The first lesson is this. When there is no accountability in our lives, we tend to strongly deviate. Look at Judges chapter 19, verse 1, which we read earlier, but I'll read it again. "In those days, when there was no king in Israel." You and I, when we do not have to be accountable, when there is no fear of having to explain ourselves or be responsible for our decisions and actions, are more prone to make bad decisions because we think we can make these decisions in isolation without having to answer to anyone else. And that is
so true. That's why it's so important to have accountability partners, people that are checking in on you and making sure that you're still following God. And it's just being smart. You might be thinking, I don't need an accountability partner because I can do it on my own. I have Jesus. I would never do that. But at the end of the day, you're going to be more likely not to do this sinful thing if you have someone always asking you questions.
Exactly what was happening in Israel. There was no king, there was a law, but people were not respecting the law. It was not being enforced. And as a result, they ended up doing something they probably never imagined they would do. The second mini lesson I want to address is we need to ensure that we treat every human being as a bearer of the image of God. Here is this man saying it would be wrong for them to do whatever they want with this man, but they can do what they want with my daughter and with his concubine. His mindset was that the life and virtue of this man were more valuable than his own daughter and the concubine of this man. We need to make sure, and that's why seeing inappropriate sites and such, we must make sure not to do it. If you want to stop viewing things online that you know you shouldn't be watching, and you know what I mean, I want you to see each girl you are looking at as a bearer of the image of God, as someone who is your daughter. Imagine if you would want
The problem is with these internet sites and all these things that you should not be watching is it perverts your mind. It makes you look at them as like an object instead of a child of God.
someone looking at your daughter doing the things you are seeing on the screen. But here's the third thing I want to highlight in this video. The more you and I stray from God, the more vulnerable we become to doing things we never imagined we would do. You see, when you look at the book of Judges as a whole, what you will see is a nation of people who have slowly drifted away from God. They have slowly deviated, and what you see happening in chapters 19 to 21 is the culmination of drifting away from God and shows how far the nation as a whole drifted away from God.
If we're not drawing closer to God every day, seeking Him, those days that we're not, we're getting actually farther away from God. There's no like, I'm always exactly right where I need to be with God. I don't need to get closer to Him or farther away from Him. That's impossible. You have to either be seeking God or getting closer to God, or you're getting farther away from God. When you keep on drifting and going farther and farther away from God, you end up making so many mistakes and so many consequences, so many problems and sins that you get into, you wouldn't even know what happened to you.
And my friend, you and I are no different, because if we do not maintain a close connection with God, if we stray from God, if we deviate from God, that is when we, like the Israelites, will find ourselves doing things that someone 10 years ago would have tried to tell us we would do, and we would have been convinced that there was no way we would do those things. There's no way I'll get a divorce. There's no way I'll have an affair. There's no way I'll be fired from my job because they found me watching something online. There's no way I'll be smoking marijuana or whatever. The further you stray from God, the more vulnerable you become to committing that sin. Now, the story doesn't end in chapter 19.
The further you stray away from God, the more vulnerable you will be to sin. And that's so true, so important, guys. And I encourage you all to be seeking God every day. And don't ever think like that you're safe. Don't ever think like, oh, I could never commit that sin. I could never commit adultery, or I can never look at those sites, or I can never do this sin, because we're all prone. We're all human and we make mistakes. So, and that's usually when we fall, is when we think we can that can never happen to us.
But in fact, it gets worse, because what happens now in chapter 20 is a civil war among the 11 tribes of Israel, and they are fighting against the tribe of Benjamin, because it was the tribe of Benjamin that committed that atrocious act of sin against one of their own Israeli brothers. So, I encourage you to read in detail chapters 20 and 21, but to summarize, there is a huge battle. Thousands and thousands of lives were lost as a result of that battle from both sides. And what ends up happening is that only 600 Benjamite men remain. Then in chapter 21, the other 11 tribes begin to feel bad or pity for the tribe of Benjamin, because they are essentially worried that this tribe of Benjamin is going to become extinct, since there are only 600 men left alive, but no Benjamite women for them to marry and reproduce. Now they have another problem, because now they are worried that one of their 12 tribes of Israel is going to become extinct. This leads to my fourth lesson. Every bad decision we make has consequences that we cannot choose. Although what these Benjamites did was wrong, the other 11 tribes coming and actually fighting and killing them was a decision they made, and now they have to deal with the outcome of that decision, and the Benjamites also have to pay for the outcome of their bad decision. Listen, you can choose your sin, but you can't choose your consequences. Every decision you make has consequences. And the problem is, personally, you and I cannot choose those consequences. So what happens is that the Israelites go and kill men from this clan called Jabesh Gilead.
Wow. Anyway, guys, that's crazy. That's wild. That's one of the craziest stories in the Bible. Comment down below if you read this chapter in the Bible before, this part of the story in the Bible. And yeah, there's so many great lessons that we can learn. There's consequences for our sins and we can't choose them. So don't think like I can just go sin and there's not going to be a consequence to that, because there always will be, which is sad, but it's true. That's the reality. So I encourage you to seek Jesus and really know that He loves you and has an amazing plan for your life. And always remember to seek Him each and every day, to draw closer to Him every day and do what He wants you to do so you don't drift like these Israelites did. So guys, I hope you liked this video. Comment down below your thoughts. Make sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't. Thank you for Bible Beacon for making this video. And watch this video here that you might like. Thank you guys so much for watching. Peace.